Hello, everybody. Welcome to Old Spook Lane. We're going to be dedicating a whole month into covering spooky topics here on Casual Chats, or should we call it Creepy Chats? I am Patricia, and I am here with two very special guests. I am here with Brett and Alex from the Splat Attack podcast, the 80s and 90s Nickelodeon podcast where they cover various topics from TV shows and movies, and they have different analytical discussions. And also, if you remember from about almost a year ago, they even did the Are You Afraid of the Dark 30th anniversary reunion live stream. So, welcome, guys.
Thank you. We're glad to be here today.
Yes, thank you, Patricia.
All right. So, 2 years ago, I did a discussion about the 2019 miniseries Are You Afraid of the Dark, based off of the 1991 anthology series with my friend, that long haired creepy guy. And since then, there have been two seasons of the Are You Afraid of the Dark miniseries due to the fact that they were really, really successful, especially for the younger viewers. And so today we're going to be covering both of them. Before we do that, I'd like to know two things from the both of you. How did you first get introduced to Are You Afraid of the Dark? And what are your thoughts on both the anthology series and of the 2019 miniseries?
Brett, I'll let you take that one, bud.
Okay.
you start. And Brett is exceedingly passionate about Are You Afraid of the Dark, and that's not a bad thing. But I don't want to come between him and the show, so I'll follow up.
Sure. Well, I might as well just start from the beginning. So basically, back in 1992, August, when Are You Afraid of the Dark first premiered on SNCC, I fondly remember watching it with my father on Saturday night because I got a chance to stay up after bedtime to see what it was all about. And we watched The Tale of the Phantom Cab together, and pretty much the moment when Flynn's head spun around 180 degrees and gave me a really good jolting of a scare. I was pretty much hooked from that show from that point on, and I just became more and more interested with the Midnight Society members as they told campfire stories in an unknown place in the woods, and just the kinds of spooky stories they could come up with together. So that somehow has shaped my ability to tell stories and create kind of spooky monster creepy art over the years. And for a while, I kind of just left it in the background as one of my hobbies or interests. And then around 2019, when I got onto Instagram and became like an active artist on there at Brett Wilson Art, I started doing more with it. And just as kind of a fun challenge, I began doing like an Are You Afraid of the Dark drawing, like a drawing of an episode every single day, just to keep up with it as like a personal thing to help me get back into drawing. And it went over pretty well. So I decided to make a book out of that. And in October of 2020, I successfully launched a Kickstarter for my book, Scary Tales, The Ultimate Unofficial Guide to Are You Afraid of the Dark, which I ended up funding through the Kickstarter and printing a limited amount of books for all that who participated in that. So that was pretty exciting to be able to, forge my passion into something tangible for all the fans out there. And other than that, I've been just pretty much doing, Are You for the Dark art here and there, and finding other avenues to channel my passion. Like I've done an entire sticker series on the original 5 seasons. I did some posters, various art prints, I've written some original ghost stories and the like based off of Are You Afraid of the Dark Tales? And so, that in combination with doing like the Are You Afraid of the Dark anniversary reunion and the Sardo's Magic Mansion retrospective on Splat Attack, it's like there's no limit to what way I can express myself through Are You Afraid of the Dark. And I guess just through the deep commitment and passion I have to it, I'm able to attract both the fans and people who are involved with the show to come together at this like nexus point that I seem to have with the show. So yeah, I'm pretty tightly associated with the show without being officially associated with it. There, in regards to the question of, what was the question regarding the reboots again? Because I know that was like a two-part question.
Yeah, the two-part question was your thoughts on the first miniseries, because we're going to be talking about the second two in a moment.
Yeah, I'll just briefly cover that. Carnival of Doom I thought was an interesting approach. I really did like the setting of the carnival. It really kind of roped me in with the visuals. It had some American Horror Story vibes to me. The Midnight Society I was kind of on the fence with. They definitely did things a little bit differently to kind of separate themselves from the Midnight Society of yore, as you would say, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different group of kids, and I just assume that they're off doing their own thing based off of being descendants of previous Midnight Society members, whatever headcanon you want to go with.
Yeah, I actually mentioned this in the first podcast I did 2 years ago, that I never really knew about how it was able to have different Midnight Society members. I did a theory that after Tucker took over the Midnight Society, that there was like a year's worth of stagnation, that to the point in which maybe groups of people maybe like heard of the Midnight Society from previous members. Like we knew in one of the last episodes of the original run that Frank moved away. And I even theorized that maybe the pocket knife that Gavin gave to Rachel belonged to Frank. But again, that was just a theory. And I take it that we'll discuss about this in a moment as well, but I take it that maybe, possibly, that all three of these miniseries that we've seen so far are all connected within the same universe, which we'll get to in just a moment. So maybe they told each other about the Midnight Society, and maybe they're able to spread across from multiple locations of their own groups of the Midnight Society, because in the first miniseries, it took place in a small town called Argento in Oregon, while the second one took place in Shadow Bay, and then the third one, they actually went on vacation in Ghost Island. But yeah, I like to think that maybe these groups of teenagers are able to carry the torch of a new generation of the Midnight Society. But as for like an explanation on how it happened, I'm still not sure. Maybe they'll answer it in another miniseries. Who knows?
Yeah, based on some of the interviews I've heard of JT Billings on other podcasts, it seems like that they have the intentions to go further with more miniseries to create some sort of grandiose arc that ties all the threads together. So they're just laying the seeds now. But I definitely like your theory, and I do see the possibility of like past Midnight Society members either having descendants or just spreading the word so that people can start their own based on what they heard.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty plausible. I tried to do it myself freshman year of college, and even though it didn't get off the ground, I like the idea of at least going into the woods with new people to tell stories.
Yeah. Now, Alex, well, what are your thoughts on the 2019 miniseries?
My thoughts were, it was good. Very, very, very abbreviated. I'm very open-minded when it comes to movies and TV shows and things like that. And being as big as I am into 90s Nickelodeon and nostalgia and things like that, I mean, obviously, look at our podcast. You get a lot of opinions, especially from our demographic of those who grew up with Are You Afraid of the Dark? And a lot of the time I see a lot of negativity towards the show because it's different. And a lot of people don't like things that are different. This is not the show that I grew up with. And of course it's not, because it's not made for us anymore. It's made for a younger generation. And I I'm usually very well. I know you don't like it, but I kind of want to check it out and see if it's warranted or not. And after watching the first episode, I thought this looks pretty good. I'm really into this. I like that it's an entire season as opposed to just anthology per episode. And now it's like anthology per series. And I like that format. I like that we got to delve a little more into the mythos of the Midnight Society. There are things about it I just didn't care for and didn't quite click, but not. There was more I liked about it than I disliked. So I was looking forward to checking out the other two seasons when they came out, and we'll get more into that as we move forward.
Cool. And I recently watched the 2019 miniseries for the first time in 2 years since I did the podcast with my friend, that long-haired creepy guy. And yeah, it's still fairly solid. I think that the Midnight Society members, they do take a little bit to get used to, especially since if you grew up with the original 90s series, you're already accustomed to like a certain group of people. But I think that they were able to fit together in terms of their strengths as people who would sit around and tell scary stories. I thought that the setting was really, really nice, taking place in a small town in Oregon where everything is all gloomy. And also the fact that Mr. Top Hat was such a really interesting villain that had a tragic backstory and had the motivations of wanting to fulfill his father's dreams of being able to make a lot of money and move to America for the land of opportunity. But then one tragic accident happened and he essentially sold his soul to the devil so that he could be able to bring back his carnival again. And the problem is that the whole monkey's paw approach, he got his carnival back, but the problem is that in the next day nobody remembers him. So yeah, I thought that the mini series was really, really good. And 2019 was interesting because, as I mentioned in that podcast, it was the year for Nickelodeon revivals. And you had Rocko's Modern Life, Static Claim, you had Invader Zim Enter the Florpus, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, and you had this one, and they were all fantastic in their own way.
In 2019, I think, no, that was 2018 when they had the Double Dare, but they still had another season in 2019.
Exactly, yeah. And also we were able to see the SpongeBob Broadway musical on television. Anyway, so I think that it was around that time in which I saw that Nickelodeon were trying to bring back their classic shows for a new generation. And for the most part, they were able to hit home runs. And I know that there were some that didn't last for very long, like the CW Legends of the Hidden Temple series, which was originally supposed to be up on Quibi. It only lasted for one season, mostly due to COVID. And all that was the same thing, in which it only had basically like 2.5 seasons, but due to COVID, they shut down as well. So being able to see these two miniseries back to back in a year, especially with the first one being a success, is more or less a miracle because both of them have their strengths and both of them do have their weaknesses, but we'll get to in a moment. But it could have easily fallen apart with, wow, the first one was really, really good because we had a lot of younger people who were really gravitating to it in a time in which when Stranger Things and American Horror Story were becoming really, really big. So this was essentially like that for a much younger audience. And I think it worked pretty well. All right, then. So with that out of the way, let's go over the discussion of the second mini-series from Are You Afraid of the Dark? It is called Are You Afraid of the Dark? Curse of the Shadows, and it premiered in February of 2021. It focuses on a new group of Midnight Society members led by a kid named Connor, and he is picking up a book that is supposedly supposed to help him out with a curse, but he ends up getting captured by this Wendigo-looking creature known as the Shadow Man. And then the rest of the Midnight Society members notice that he is missing, and so they go about solving this mystery on how to not only get their friend back, but knowing about the haunted woods, the Shadow Man, and the past that lay behind what happened to the town that they live in, Shadow Bay, 25 years prior. So yeah, I'd like to know from your guys' initial thoughts about the second miniseries.
Brett?
I actually enjoyed this one. I didn't think I would, but I liked it the most out of the three, spoiler alert, because I enjoy the setting. I like the story building. It really lays a solid foundation. I like the ties to Sardo with his grandson running the shop, and then him later showing up in one of the later parts, and just this mystique that surrounds the Shadow Man through the tale that they tell, where they show this kid that was essentially taken away and then brought back. So I feel like it's a very cohesive story that just constantly builds upon itself throughout each part. And I found the kids maybe not so much relatable as I found them enjoyable. Like I didn't think they were too abrasive with their pop culture-ness, so to speak. But as they're like trying to wrestle with all these different ways for how to stop the Shadow Man, I was pretty engaged throughout with it. My only qualm is that I wish the Curse of the Shadow story was a little bit tighter. I felt like, was it 5 or 6 parts, was a tad too long for telling the story, because by the end, I felt like the Shadow Man himself, the main villain, lost some of his mystique just from being shown on screen too many times or even hinted at. But I felt if it was like cut down to maybe a part or two, it would have enough high tension and fast paced flow to it that it would keep me hooked and actually on the edge of my seat for the entire ride. So overall, I enjoyed this piece from the miniseries reboots.
Okay, Brett, I think you and I are going to be a lot more in sync with this than I had initially thought we were going to be. As it was brought up earlier, Brett is a huge Are You Afraid of the Dark fan. I am also a big fan, but not to the degree that Brett is. And I know he has very strong opinions, both good and bad, about the show. And we have actively avoided talking about these two miniseries with each other until this episode. And I thought this season, the Curse of Shadows, we're going to have very, very different opinions, because I know there is a lot of things that he doesn't care for. And to hear that this is your favorite of the three really surprises me, because it is also mine. I really dug this. I liked the first one. I'd say lukewarm. I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10. I liked it fine. Yeah. But I really dug this season. I liked the story. I liked the idea of the Shadow Man, especially because the series is called Are You Afraid of the Dark? And much of this episode or this season is about the Shadow Man and what lurks in the dark. And I also thought they had a really clever tie-in with the way they utilized the actual title of Are You Afraid of the Dark into the story. And the dialogue that they had, that it didn't feel hokey and cheesy. It was actually pretty fitting for a conversation that teenagers would have. And the main thing for me that makes a story work is not just the story, but the characters. They've got to be engaging and fun, and there has to be some relatability, but just don't be annoying. Don't be little punks and brats the entire series. If you give me an annoying character or an entire cast that's annoying, I'm going to tune out. But I thought all of these characters were they fit their purpose. But I also liked that they weren't just stereotypes. They all had individual personalities, and that was also interwoven into the story as well. And I really appreciated that. And like Brett, I loved Sardo. I loved the new iteration of Sardo. I really enjoyed him. And I also loved all the nods. If I was a kid watching it today, I wouldn't catch any of those nods, but it wouldn't have felt in your face like I'm missing something here, because
exactly,
it just felt like part of the conversation.
Yeah, like for instance, like literally one of the first things that you see in Luke's locker is the ghastly grinner. And they mentioned this twice, with not only the little puppet, but also with the comic book that Jay has. And even in the last part of the first miniseries, where one of the stories that we're going to be telling was the tale of the return of the ghastly grinner. So yeah, the ghastly grinner is a very popular reference in these miniseries. And then you also have, when they go over to Sardo's shop, there's the pinball machine from Tales of the Pinball Wizard. There's the Super Specs from Tales of the Super Specs. So yeah, there's all of these little homages in the miniseries that only hardcore fans will be able to pay attention to and be like, oh yeah, I know this reference, and oh, they brought this up. So I thought that that was really clever, and I thought that that was a really nice way to please the fans. But even for those who aren't familiar with Are You Afraid of the Dark, wouldn't even really catch too much attention to it. But yeah, I really enjoyed the new Sardo. I think what was it, like his son or his grandson or something, who's played by Ryan Beal, and he did a really good job. Like I could genuinely see him being related to Sardo. It wasn't like, oh, I'm
Yes,
related
the
to him, and
mannerisms,
it
the
doesn't
voice,
feel that way.
the mannerisms, the cadence. It was solid. It really felt like a continuation of that character.
I agree.
It did. And not only that, but they also brought back Richard Dumont as Sardo as a cameo, and I thought that that was fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, making a reference.
Yes,
Oh, that was
absolutely.
great.
And it's our
That was
first
so
one
great.
too, because I mean, sure, we've had like minor characters who appeared in the miniseries who probably were like young kids in the original Are You Afraid of the Dark? But this is like our first major reoccurring character that was featured in the original series who is in here. And unfortunately, we will not have the same thing with Aaron Tager's Dr. Vink because he passed away in 2019.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if maybe there's
Yeah.
another miniseries, maybe they'll have like a descendant or something. But yeah, that actually makes me wonder about how this whole world of Are You Afraid of the Dark works. Like, apparently in the miniseries, you know, Sardo and, you know, all of these little references that we saw with the ghastly grinner and the pinball machine, all that stuff is, it takes place in the real world. While in this anthology series, they were stories. So yeah, I take it that this is a whole completely different interpretation of it and just there to reference it. But yeah, I wouldn't say that the original series and the mini series are in the same universe. I like to think of them as something completely separate, but I thought it was like a really nice touch.
Yeah.
And also, I do definitely think that the six-parter for Curse of the Shadows is, I think it works and it doesn't at the same time. Like it does go in a much more slower pace than the other two, but at the same time we get to know more about these characters. We get to have them developed more. The villains are developed more and the settings developed more, even though that it's more or less the same over and over again. We got to see Shadow Bay, we got to see the lighthouse, we got to see the haunted woods. They do play on this over and over again, but at the same time these are really important locations that are crucial to the story. And also it builds up to it and it's able to pay off pretty decently, I might add, because we were able to not only learn about the past, where we finally learn about the Book of Shadows and what it was able to bring about the Shadow Man and why it actually happened, why the Shadow Man exists, how are the kids disappearing. So I think that being in six, maybe it could have been like, I don't know, 4 parts, just like Ghost Island, but I don't know. I just feel like maybe with 6 parts, the story that it was building up to, I think it does it pretty well. There are some slow moments, I do admit, but you have to have those slow moments so that the atmosphere can bring up and the stakes are a lot higher. So yeah, I think that for overall, I really enjoyed watching Curse of the Shadows. It definitely has a much more upbeat and a much happier ending, where we got to see them go back in time and save June Murphy from falling down on the cliff where she was trying to grab the key to the lighthouse, and basically just retroactively prevented any of that from happening, and then everybody was able to live off decent lives. I mean, it kind of happens in the mini series as well, but they never really explain it other than, oh, here's a newspaper, it shows off they kids disappeared and they haven't aged a day. And they kind of also do that with Ghost Island, but we'll get to that later. But here I feel it's a little bit more of a complete ending, where we got to see everybody living off their normal lives and a much more happier life, knowing that the Shadow Man is no longer there, and that people were able to not have to worry about sitting in a lighthouse for who knows how long they've been in there. And the sad moment where you got to see the kids disappear because they've been in the dark for too long, and also the scene in which when the Shadow Man as Connor, when Luke read the book and he brought him into the real world, was able to manipulate his friends, kill Sardo, and been able to almost get his friends grounded so that he can be able to continue stealing kids to gain power. So I think that what it was able to accomplish as a miniseries, knowing that the first one was was such a major success and they had to up the ante. I think they did a fantastic job.
And I do agree with your sentiments about this being the six-parter, because I really feel like the story is more with the characters than with the Shadow Man. Because where the story really shines for me is the interactions between the main characters. And it's their story that gets fleshed out for the most part until the latter half of the series. And it seems like you said, you need those slower moments in order for their character to shine and get their opportunity to have their limelight with on screen time. But the Shadow Man, that's been a lot of repeat. You'd see the same thing happen many, many times, which is where I agree with Brett, where the pacing for that could have been punched up. We could have had more of a variety with all the things that you can do in the dark and with shadows. Yeah. I love the shadow play in the first couple of episodes. I thought that was brilliant. But it became stale by episode 3, and then 4 on. It was, okay, you're giving me the same thing, and give me something different with the Shadow Man. But you still needed those extra episodes to continue the story for the main characters. And I really feel like everything they did is believable. This feels like a logical step that these characters would each take with their each special kind of personality. And I also wanted to mention, because I have seen this brought up many times by fans of Are You Afraid of the Dark, that the new seasons, they suck. They're awful. No matter how many, you can have your defenders, which right now we're all pretty much defending this particular season, but a lot of people, old OG fans, are, oh, the new seasons are terrible. And I really, the whole season, I'm going, why do people not like this one? I mean, you have great characters, you have a really fun, creative story, albeit even if it gets a little slow, and you got all these awesome homages. It really feels like this season was written by people who really have a grasp on what made the originals so special, and they wanted to sprinkle and pepper some of that in for the OG fans. And they even acknowledged that at the very end of the season, whenever they were talking about, oh, you'll never beat the OG. And the other one had remarked, yeah, but the new one can still be fun. And I do want to comment, because we were talking about Richard Dumont just a bit ago. Brett and I had the wonderful honor of getting the opportunity to interview Richard Dumont, and we asked him about his time on the set. What did it feel like? And he remarked that it really felt like the series was being handled by people who loved the series, and when he was there, he got an applause just by being on the set, and he really felt like this was in good hands, at least this particular season. So I really enjoyed this season. I enjoyed it a lot. Yes, the OG is superior, but it's not bad. It's not bad at all. And I would highly encourage anyone who's an Are You Afraid of the Dark fan to check this season out. The Carnival of Doom was pretty good. Curse of Shadows, it is good.
Yeah, I would argue it goes up to great, and that's coming from a skeptic who is, more of a fan of the Tide and Trude horror anthology format with the Midnight Society bumpers. But if you just take a moment to remove yourself from what you love and give this a chance to stand on its own 2 feet, it really isn't that bad. I'm with Alex on this. I enjoy getting to know these characters, so maybe the slower pacing does help with that, and all their little quirks and how they work together in different ways to solve all these different obstacles whenever the Shadow Man appears. And I think it does a great job of telling the story and keeping us roped in with all the little things and even the Easter eggs for the fans. So it's not a bad offering.
Not only that, but it also has Easter eggs, once again, very similar to the first series. It also has Easter eggs for horror fans because, as we mentioned before, with the last names of the characters like Rachel Carpenter, that's based off of John Carpenter, and Graham Raimi, the Sam Raimi. So we have Hanna and Seth Romero, which is George Romero from the Dead series. So yeah, I just thought that was actually a really nice touch. And I think that with the fact that people just didn't really give this a chance when it first came out because, it's not like the original series. Why wasn't it an anthology series? It's like, I even stated this almost 10 years ago that this is the direction that I wanted to see happen if Are You Afraid of the Dark was ever going to get a reboot. I wanted to see them being involved in the story, very similar to Tale of the Silver Sight, in which Gary and Tucker were involved in getting the silver sight and being able to solve this mystery involving with a ghost. And I thought that that was a great direction that I would have loved to have seen if the show didn't cancel around 2000. So I'm glad that they're able to go into this direction as opposed to like staying in the same old anthology formula, which would have gotten pretty stale and probably been not as regarded, especially in a time in which we had American Horror Story and Stranger Things able to take in that concept of, hey, let's just introduce this bit of horror and let's just involve with the characters and the setting and what the monster is and their motivations and all that kind of stuff. It would have been seen as something inferior and something that should have stayed in the 90s. But I'm glad that the people behind this were able to take that risk and being able to go in a different direction, but at the same time homaging the original. So yeah, I mean, there are some things about it that do kind of hold it back. Like you were saying before that the pace can be a bit slow at times, and maybe the Shadow Man does show up a little bit too much. A similar complaint that I had with the first series was with Rachel's mom, in which she was like acting over the top, really goofy that you would see in the 90s series. And they kind of do that similarly with Luke's dad, where he's basically saying a whole bunch of dad jokes.
Oh, yeah.
But it actually does rectify itself because in parts 5 and 6, he actually does become a lot more serious as a parent when Connor told him about, well, I mean, the Shadow Man disguised himself as Connor, where he told him about what they were doing and that they were, sneaking out and going over to the woods and not being able to tell him anything about what he was doing. And so he said, you're grounded for the rest of the year. I'm going to take your phone away. You're in house arrest and all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, at least he's actually acting like a parent as opposed to like some bubbly goof like the first parent was in the series. Actually kind of interesting because you have a mother and daughter with the first series. Now you have a son and dad in the second series. Interesting. Anyway, so yeah, those are like my only gripes with it because everything else they were able to improve what the first series was able to bring. So if you are interested in checking out the first series, it's pretty easy to do nowadays because it's up on both Paramount Plus and on Netflix and Amazon Prime and all the other streaming sites. For some reason, I have no idea why Curse of the Shadows is not up on either Netflix or on Paramount Plus. I don't know whether it's because it just came out last year. I'm not sure, but it is up on DVD, and you could watch it on various streaming sites like Amazon Prime and Vudu and various others. So it is pretty easy for you to check out. All right, so let's go over to our last miniseries in this discussion. We have Are You Afraid of the Dark? Ghost Island, which premiered in July of 2022. So yeah, it only premiered like a few months ago. So it focuses on, once again, a new group of kids from the Midnight Society, and they're taking a vacation over to Ghost Island, where Kayla, she basically is told by her twin sister, Bella, who had since passed away from an illness, saying that this is one of the last things that they were supposed to do as a group, and she wanted to tell her something there. And this particular place that they're going to, which is a hotel resort in a place called Ghost Island, is haunted, and there's a mystery involving with like people disappearing, and there's a lot of things that are happening involving with like a kid who helps out with them, who happens to be a worker of the hotel, but he does not know about a certain plot point we'll get to later, a grumpy maitre d' who would not be out of place in Faulty Towers, and various other things. So yeah, I'd like to know, what are your thoughts on Ghost Island?
Alex, you should start this one.
And I said this earlier. I think Brett and I are going to be very, very much in line with this one. I did not like this season at all. And it goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about the characters. If the characters fall flat for me, the whole season is going to be not. It's going to be a chore to sit through, and it was. I did not care for these characters. They were very much stereotypes, or they made decisions that were really dumb. even when it's not related to the elements that they're having to go up against, but whenever they're just in conversations with each other, it's like, stop, just stop all of this nonsense. And there is one particular storyline that I thought, what are we doing here? And it was what is that kid's name? Max was one of them. Who was the kid that liked Max?
Leo.
Leo, yes. You could have taken that out, and you could have taken out the kid having a crush on the chaperone. Both of those gave nothing to the story. There nothing has changed by the end of it. You're dragging this on, and only for a 4-parter. But whenever the season started, and then we see this kid in 96. And he's gonna go see Scream, and he's listening to Celine Dion. I'm going, no, the kid like that's not gonna listen to Celine Dion, not in the 90s. And
yes, we're gonna be listening to Nirvana and Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yeah, okay. What is this Celine Dion?
Now, and again, I understand they want representation, and that's fantastic. In today's age, you want to have representation and things like that, but you're also representing 96, and boys in 96, they especially ones who look like this and went to see these kinds of movies and talk like this is not how gays were, at least gay boys were in 96. And
yeah, they were a lot more closeted. I mean, especially if you remember the whole Matthew Shepard incident that happened a year later.
Yes, very, very much. And okay, the romance thing was cool. I thought they acted it very, very well, but still by the end of it, nothing was added. Leo, nothing changed with him. Max, nothing changed with him. And you just took a lot of time away. And the same with the chaperone thing too, of that was annoying as all get out, because they're in the middle of being chased by the ghost, and then he's having to go off and go get something, and they get into this car and they start to leave, and then before they leave, like, I'll leave whenever you admit that you like me. What are you doing? Your friends are in danger. Stop this. Go. Stop. Don't be that kid. Yeah. They just made decisions and arguments that made no sense, and they were so slow with understanding things. The amount of times that they took them to, let me rephrase that. The amount of time it took them to realize that you can also get reflections off of water, and it happens 2 or 3 times where it took them a while to realize, oh, this is a giant mirror too. Like, yes, morons, move. And it just, the characters were dumb. They were just dumb. And the lead, as good as a job as she did with the performances, I was getting very, very tired of almost every time she's on screen. It's either pouty or crying.
It makes a lot of sense considering that she just lost her twin sister.
Yes, which I get that as well. But can you do something else with her? We're in the middle of this ghost hunt, and there needs to be some other character development outside of just the last 30 minutes of episode 4. Give her something else to do emotionally, and not just be pouty the whole time. If you're going to do this if it was a 6-part series like the last one, okay, you'll have more time to be able to flesh that out longer. You're doing a 4-part series. You can't have it be the same note, and all of them were that way. Every single one of them was the same note, the same beat all the way through. And
yeah, I do admit that they were very one notes. Like, Kayla was being very depressed about the loss of her sister, and Leo was very flamboyant, and Ferris was basically trying to hit on the chaperone, even though that she already has a boyfriend. Yes. And then Summer, who is Kayla's cousin, is just basically telling Ferris, hey, she doesn't like you, stop hitting on her, and telling Kayla, hey, you need to stop with thinking about Bella, grow up and move on with your life. So yeah, it basically just plays off to the same thing over and over and over again. And then with Max, I think that they were trying to emulate what a kid in the 90s was like, especially if the portrayal of a gay kid is what they were going for. I mean, I don't know if that's the direction they were going for, but if that was the case, not enough development. And then they try to pull off the whole tale of a dream girl thing about like, oh, Max finds out he's a ghost and he's been dead this entire time.
And that was okay, not that, but the dialogue for this was terrible because the first time we see Max post becoming a ghost, the first conversation he had was just ghost joke after ghost joke after ghost joke after ghost joke. Like, what are you writers doing? There's no subtlety at all with any of this. What was you going to say, Brett?
Where do I begin? I mean, yeah, I mean, I have like 7 pages of notes written down in my phone right now. Not all of them are bad, but more than 50% of them are. And I will just say in the most respectful way that I do applaud the showrunners for picking a very atypical setting for this horror story, because when you think about vacations, you think about bright sunny weather, ocean views, and everything beautiful, paradise oriented. And to play with that kind of cheerful, inherently positive setting and make it creepy, it's hard to pull off. And
yeah, I do agree, because the last 2 settings we had were very dreary.
Yes.
Argento was very gloomy because it's Oregon. That's how it looks like 24/7. And then Shadow Bay, which makes sense because, shadows, and that was the whole point of the whole miniseries. So having it in Ghost Island where it's bright and sunny for most of the time, you're right. It does play itself a little bit different as opposed to like, here's season 3 and we're in another dreary location again. I mean, at least if they wanted to go somewhere in a quote unquote summer trip, at least they didn't go camping or a summer camp.
I would have preferred that though. But I do applaud them for taking a risk and trying to go against the grain here, because that's not easy to do. And I'm sure if I were in JT Billings' shoes, I would have just as much of a challenge trying to make it convincing. But I do like how they combined it to this mysterious room that was hidden away, because at least that's where they can concentrate their darkness along with all the other hidden passageways and floors of the Vale Hotel. However, technical stuff aside, I love the camera work, especially the sweeping pans with like the different cross dissolves of people doing things. And even some of the mirror effects to a degree, especially when the hands are coming out of the reflective like metal door. I thought that was really cool. However, that's not enough to save all the problems I have with this story. And I think I'm just going to have to start with all the references. Where Curse of the Shadows did it really well. They hinted at them to a point where it's like, oh yeah, this is for the fans. You'll like this. And I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, you're representing us. But with Ghost Island, it just feels like, okay, how many can we shoehorn in here so that people know, hey, we're being true to the original. We're being true to the original. We're not trying to do something different, but yet somehow that counteracts their intentions here, because I have like at least a dozen references that they put in here, and it just took me out of it the more they kept just name dropping stuff left and right. Like I have Laughing in the Dark, I have Lonely Ghost, I have Captured Souls, Midnight Madness, Frozen Ghost, Whispering Walls, Shiny Red Bicycle, Mystical Mirror, Dream Girl, Station 109.1, Hungry Hounds, Twice, Old Man Corcoran, Cutter's Treasure, Hints of Quicksilver, and Silver Sight.
Yes.
So it can be overwhelming at times while you're trying to decipher the story that really feels like it's just treading shallow water for most of it, until it tries to develop the ghost backstory a lot more.
And the timing for it on the previous series was pitch perfect, because it was at the right time for it. Whereas this one, they just put it throughout the entire thing, even in dramatic moments. That's very distracting. It felt like, hey, this worked in the last season. Let's double down this season since people liked it so much.
Yeah, and with less time too.
Yeah.
And I understand probably due to COVID that they probably couldn't shoot as much, but still, it was like they were trying to give the same development of Curse of the Shadows, but they had a lot less time to do so.
Yeah, I also thought it was very peculiar that they conjoined the first 2 parts. At least that's how it was on Hulu. I don't know what's like on other streaming services, but
it was the same on Prime,
and it was the same on Vudu as well.
But so they probably just produced it that way, which I thought was a little strange.
If I remember right, my wife had actually pointed out, they're doing a new season of Go. Yes, I do. I am well aware. But she was actually fairly interested. I showed her a trailer, and the commercial, if I remember right, said the first 2 parts was going to be out on a certain day. So I think it did come out in that order, 1, 2 together, and then the rest of the episodes individually.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious what the decision was behind that as opposed to the previous seasons. I don't know if there's like scheduling or if it made the story flow better or what. I'm sure they, obviously the producers would know. We don't as much.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there were some interesting ideas here, like the whole introduction of Louisa, who's this ghost who basically is haunting the hotel. We find out in, I believe it's part 2, that the reason why this happened was because she was falling in love with a guy named Cutter, whose boat was crashed into a reef, and so they started developing this relationship together. And then the most stereotypical cliche thing that you can ever do with a guy who's going on a boat saying, "Don't worry, I'll be back." He never does, and so she wants to bring him back. It's very similar to what happened with Curse of the Shadows, in which, we have the guy who is devastated with his daughter's death, and he wants to bring her back using a book. Where did I see this before? Anyway, so...
Although the book looks a little bit different this time.
Yeah, it does look slightly different this time, even though in one part when they were reading it, there was a part in Spanish that was translated to Book of Shadows. I'm like, oh, really? So, yeah, it's actually interesting. Anyway, continuing on. So she steals it from the witch doctor, and she reads off the spell over to a mirror, and she's able to rescue Cutter, and they swapped places where she was trapped in the ghost world, and he was back alive in the real world, and he up and left her, and she was basically abandoned in this ghost world. And then eventually she succumbed to turning into a ghost, and now she's really angry, and she basically kidnaps people who go into room 13 whenever that they're about. And again, very similar to the Shadow Man, in which when people wander into the woods and they get captured at night. So yeah, we saw this playing off twice in the miniseries. The first time we see it is literally at the beginning in 1983, in which a mother and her 2 kids, they are trying to save themselves from the rain. And so the only room that was available was room 13, and then they completely disappeared. And then the second thing was with Max and his friend, and it was 1996, which, by the way, what is the deal with 1996 and tragic things happening in Are You Afraid of the Dark? Because that's the same year that Jill Murphy died. Are you trying to tell me that 1996 was his day, that it was the year that people died?
I mean, that was the year Are You Afraid of the Dark died before it got revived for season 6.
That is true. So maybe that is a clever homage then. It's like, yes,
I
1996.
think
so. when people die, that's when Are You Afraid of the Dark died.
They actually mentioned that. Leo actually said a quote, something about the Midnight Society dying, and my heart sank a little bit because I'm like, oh, this is making me think back of nostalgic memories and what has changed since the very beginning.
Yeah, I guess it does make a lot of sense considering that in Ghost Island, there is no Midnight Society at all, because
not technically.
Well, okay, true, not technically, because Bella was the leader of the Midnight Society, and when she died, the group disbanded. So, okay, kudos for something a little bit different, in which you technically don't have a Midnight Society until literally at the very end of the miniseries. But still, I feel like if you just cut the whole Midnight Society thing off and you just would have called it Ghost Island, I think it would have just been like a regular miniseries. Other than the homages, there's not really much of Are You Afraid of the Dark here that I can salvage.
Yes. Oh, I got a big point about this, because I honestly feel like these miniseries, all 3 of them, could be a lot more successful if they're not, like, I don't want to say riding on their coattails, but it does it does make those tentative connections to the previous Are You Afraid of the Dark while still being its own thing. And I know a lot of people out there like that, but if they just decide to call it something else and did their own thing without the Are You Afraid of the Dark puzzle pieces laced through it, I think it would be even more successful because they could just focus on the characters building their own stories and lore without trying to connect to the past too much.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that would be really interesting, but Nickelodeon has had history of trying to bring in new shows that are sort of spiritual successors to other shows, or trying to be various similarities to other shows, but it didn't exactly work out very well. I mean, lest we forget the multiple times they try to bring in a new sketch comedy series after all that was canceled, like Awesomeness TV and Nick Studio 10. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, nostalgia really sets a high bar for anything to follow after it. And because of the lightning in the bottle era that was the 90s, produced just hit after hit after hit, it's hard to know what other direction to go with new content while keeping it fresh and relatable. Like, I feel like somewhere it's going to suffer to some degree, no matter how hard,
I mean, yeah, that's the Nickelodeon mentality. We're gonna milk a cash cow for all it's worth until it becomes dry and stable.
SpongeBob.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Excuse me.
No, you're fine. I'm also catching the same allergies as well because it's pretty thick in the air. So yes, they do tend to do that, in which they don't give anything else a chance unless it follows in the Sponge's path. Yep. The Loud House is probably the closest thing, except that they're doing it way too fast. It's already in its fifth season. I mean, no, it's been around for 5 years, and it's been given like a spin-off series, a TV movie, a live action movie. It's going to have a live action series, and it's only been around for 5 years.
Loud House is going to be the second cash cow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. It's that Nickelodeon's mentality is, let's put all of our eggs in one basket, and anything else that doesn't become a success, well, there you go. It's off the drain. And considering that, if you remember the allegations from a certain person that used to be, once upon a time, the king of Nickelodeon live action shows, they're going to probably have to think again and go back to square one, in which what direction that they should give their live action shows.
And I really hope so.
I do want to point out, just going with this, about revivals and things like that. We got to have the opportunity to interview Phil Moore. And one of the questions that somebody presented to him was, can you bring Nickelodeon back to its former glory? And he had actually pointed out that a lot of the higher ups that are with Nickelodeon now, which was like 2001 when Brian Robbins took over, Brian Robbins helmed like all that and worked in tandem quite a bit with he who must not be named. And he had said, Phil said that working with Brian, that's part of the goal. He's actually made a team of creators and writers who are people who grew up in the 90s, our demographic, and want to continue to make things that are for the current generation, but also link it to things that were successful in the past that we love. So that way both kids and their parents will have something to enjoy together. And I think that's long-term goal. And that's going to take a while to get out of that mindset. And here's hoping. But with all the revivals, like you had mentioned earlier in this episode, I don't see that being off the table, but it's going to have to take quite a bit of doing to get their heads off the Sponge's Kool-Aid.
Yeah, even with our own individual efforts, it's just been an uphill battle just to even get them to look at us and listen to the fans versus just being in their echo chamber of, we got these one, maybe two shows that are successful. Let's keep making them successful. And I think they're forgetting that it's important to take risks and really try creative things that are really out there, yet also relatable to the kids. I mean, there's a reason why the philosophy Nick as Kids worked so well for the Geraldine Laybourne era in the 90s, because it created that direct connection where the television, it made the kids who were watching felt like they were understood by the people who were making the shows for them. And I feel like if we can reconnect that kind of magical, rapport between the audience and the creators, then
Yeah.
there's certainly an opportunity to have a second revival of that magic and everything that we love about like the Nickelodeon studios of the past.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that with all the revivals and things that have happened, and the uphill battles that we have, I am glad that we at least have this Are You Afraid of the Dark series. As much as we didn't care for Ghost Island, the first two seasons, miniseries, were quite good, and I kind of want to see where else they go with this. I'm glad that it's been successful enough that they have continued it, and I want to see more. And I'm not opposed if they decide to do other reboots, modern day reboots, to see where that would take them. I slightly off topic, but I still am here. But I think it would be fun to have like a Secret World of Alex Mack revival where we never saw her get rid of her powers at the end of the series, so she could still have or be passed on to her kids, and then now you've got Alex Mack Juniors with powers going through junior high school.
Yeah, kind of like how they were able to bring in the Disney Junior series where they continued off the Rocketeer, and it was,
Yes.
we have the Rocketeer's granddaughter this time around. So maybe that could be a possibility if that was what the intended ending was, where Alex got to keep her powers as opposed to removing it. I mean, it would be really interesting to see a new take on Alex Mack where, you know, she has these powers, but she hates them. Where, you know, she basically doesn't want these powers. She wants to be a normal kid, but she kind of needs these powers because she's supposed to take down Danielle Atron, who's basically taken over this town with this evil corporation because power and money, and we need to hide things. That's not relatable at all. Sarcasm.
But it is interesting.
Anyway, but yeah, it is really interesting. And I'm sure that, you know, down the line, if they continue on this path, I'm sure that there'll probably be various other reboots and continuations. I mean, we were seeing in recent news that they are planning on doing the Avatar: The Last Airbender Netflix series, and they're also doing the movies that are going to be coming out from the Avatar studios. So no information about what the first movie is going to be about. They're still working on it. But again, that just basically shows you that if a show is able to bring in a lot of popularity, then they'll definitely consider bringing it back. I mean, we already saw what happened when Hey Arnold was able to be released on, you know, Nick Rewind and the Splat, and they were able to generate a lot of people with the hashtags of Hey Arnold Save the Jungle movie, and then we got the Jungle movie. And then, you know, fan petitions were similar to with Joan and Vasquez of, you know, bring back Invader Zim, and then we got Enter the Florpus. And yeah, I think that if fan demand is there, I'm sure that we'll be able to see new takes on various old shows that a lot of people have been wanting to see for a long time. But in the meanwhile, we do have these 3 seasons of the Are You Afraid of the Dark miniseries, and whether they'll be doing a 4th season, I'm not sure. I mean, usually from what we've seen in the pattern, they've either been released every year or every 2 years. So I'm sure by sometime next year, we'll probably get an announcement about whether they're going to or not.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it continues to connect to the previous series and where it heads from here. I'm actually kind of curious what you two think it would be about, or what you would like it to be about, since each season has a distinct theme to it.
Yeah, I mean, one was about kind of like a take on, you know, the traveling circus. The other one was a shadow man, and the third one was ghosts. So who knows? Maybe they'll have vampires, or maybe they'll have zombies, or maybe they'll have some other supernatural creature. Who knows? And as for like what their take on the Midnight Society would be, I mean, definitely a lot better than Ghost Island, that's for sure. I actually want to care about the people I'm watching.
Yeah.
The setting would be really interesting. I mean, maybe it could take place in a city, or maybe it could take place in, like I was joking about earlier, a summer camp. You know, akin to like Friday the 13th, or maybe something, you know, a little bit different, like go off the grains, maybe take a place in a different country. So yeah, I think that'll be really interesting if maybe somebody goes to Japan and we get to see the yokai. I would love to see that. That would be really interesting.
I'm on board with that.
Yeah. Are You Afraid of the Dark yokai edition?
Yokai watch.
Yes. Anyway, so
I would like to piggyback on something that's already been established within Are You Afraid of the Dark lore and push it farther. I mean, if we're doing miniseries about it, I would like to flesh out a haunted movie theater, because we got to see some of that with Tale of
Midnight
the
Madness.
yeah, but that was just a film that was haunted. It'd be
Right.
cool to see a haunted movie theater, and especially the way that movie theaters and movie have changed, period, since the 90s. You could have the Midnight Society be employees there just doing their job, and then at the end of the night they're in the projectors, and they're just sharing stories, but the stories they end up sharing become the movies and they come to life. And then they have to figure out how to write a new story that can combat what has been loosed. And it could work well for a while and then flip on its end. So that way you'd have a full 4 episodes with like a new monster or a new creature coming out, and how now that new monster combats with the old one and things like that. I know. I think it would be fun.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a interesting take. Very creative, and you can do a lot with it. For me personally, I would like to see like a haunted or enchanted library of some sort. I mean, I know it's been done with Pagemaster and even Gigi McHale's library series, but I still would like to entertain the idea that if they're still borrowing like bits and pieces of previous Are You Afraid of the Dark iterations, maybe Betty Ann could be like the librarian there, or work in some quiet librarian tropes and have books come to life or suck people in and they have to be rescued from them. Or maybe have someone who's got like the Book of Shadows who's controlling all these stories through it, and there's like a certain spell that allows them to be released, and it could be even be conjured by a previous Midnight Society member that got voted out who wants revenge. I think there's many different directions to take it, and it'd be interesting to see how they could flip stories on their head when they can either go into a story and then try and get out, or jump across different stories to see how they handle different environments on the fly.
Yeah, if we are going to get like at least one more miniseries for Are You Afraid of the Dark, I would love to see at least 1 or 2 of the former Midnight Society members meeting up with the current members. I think that that'll be a fantastic way to kind of like bookend the series, where you have very similar to Tale of the Silver Sight, in which like you have this major disaster that's happening in this town involving with like decades worth of Midnight Society members being affected. And so it's up to the current Midnight Society members to kind of like save everything. So if they're going to have like one more of maybe a possibility of like passing the torch over from the old to the new, I think that that'll be a perfect way to kind of cap things off.
Agreed. You have no idea how good it felt to see Gary show up for the Silver Sight in the first part. I had enough of Tucker.
Yeah. So until then, we will definitely have to wait and see when the next miniseries of Are You Afraid of the Dark will be shown. And I hope that you guys will be able to join me on that discussion. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, sure. Glad to be here.
All right, then. So, yeah, that should be it for this episode of Old Spook Lane Creepy Chats. So, guys, thank you so much for coming on by. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Always happy to interact with other 90s Nick fans out there on the internet.
Yes, thank you so very much.
Yeah, so why don't you guys plug and promote your stuff?
Sure. Well, we're Splat Attack Podcast. As we mentioned in the beginning, 80s, 90s Nickelodeon is our wheelhouse. You can check out our YouTube channel at Splat Attack Podcast as well. They're pretty much video versions of our podcast episodes, which are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or pretty much wherever else you could find podcasts. We're on dozens of platforms. And we release main episodes, which are about like an hour and a half every other week, and then mini-sodes on our off weeks. And we're super excited to be offering a slew of really fun and exciting episodes for spooky season.
Awesome. And as for me, you can check out my work at oldschoollane.net. You can check out my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/oldschoollane. I have a Facebook page, facebook.com/oldschoollane. I'm on Twitter at Patty_B_Miranda. You can find me and my other podcasts on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, many places. New episodes will go there first, and then they'll go up in a few days on YouTube. We'll be continuing this spooky-thon with more discussions on various spooky TV shows and movies. What they'll be, you'll have to tune in and find out. So that's it. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.